The story of humanity's beginning is one of the most familiar stories. Genesis chapter 2 verse 7 states it very clearly. Then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. From dust, Adam was created. From Adam's rib, Eve was formed. They were placed in a perfect garden, given dominion over all creatures, and had only one command: do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That is the story we know. That is the story we are taught. But you need to know this. That story, while true, is dangerously incomplete. It is like reading a summary report of a momentous event, a report that has omitted the most crucial details, the context that could completely change the meaning of the entire story. What if I told you that even before the dust was formed into a man, an army of spiritual entities had been created, beings who became witnesses to the entire drama of humanity? What if the Garden of Eden was not simply a garden, but a divine laboratory, a covenantal space with a specific, predetermined time limit? And what if the tragedy of the fall was not merely a simple act of disobedience, but the foretold outcome of a war that had begun in the heavenly realms long before? These questions are not speculation. They are questions posed and answered by an ancient text we have begun to explore, the Book of Jubilees. And as we turn these pages, we will realize that the creation story we know is merely the surface of a much deeper ocean of truth. These omitted details are not just interesting trivia. They are the keys to understanding the origin of sin, the nature of the divine laws, and the cosmic conflict that is unfolding around us. Prepare yourself, because we are about to go back in time, back to before Adam, to witness the true beginning of all things. Before we delve deeper into these revelations, it is important to remember where we are in the larger story. Recall the context we established in the previous episode. We are not simply reading an ancient book. We are standing on Mount Sinai beside Moses. For 40 days and 40 nights, he did not just receive the 10 Commandments. He was listening. He was listening to one of the angels of the presence, a scribe of heaven, recite to him the entire history of the universe. And the source of this story is not memory or legend. Its source is the heavenly tablets, the eternal records of heaven, where every event was inscribed by God from before all time. This entire series, the entire Book of Jubilees, is the record of what Moses heard in that sacred history lesson. In the previous episode, we discovered the existence of this framing narrative and understood its importance. It gives the Book of Jubilees an unchallengeable authority, proclaiming itself as the full and uncensored version of history. And now it is time for us, along with Moses, to listen to the first chapter of that cosmic chronicle. The angel of the presence is about to open his mouth, and his words will take us back to a time before time itself, to the first week, the creation week. But this will be a version of the creation week that you have never heard before. To truly appreciate the difference and depth that the Book of Jubilees offers, we must begin with the original story, the foundational narrative recorded in the very first lines of the Bible. Genesis chapter 1 opens with one of the most majestic and powerful sentences ever written. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Over the next 6 days, through a series of divine commands, our world was formed from chaos and darkness. On the first day, God said, "Let there be light," and light was separated from darkness. On the second day, he created the expanse, dividing the waters above from the waters below, forming the sky. On the third day, he gathered the waters into one place, causing the dry land to appear. and commanded the earth to bring forth vegetation, plants, and fruit trees. On the fourth day, he placed the lights in the dome of the sky, the sun to rule the day, the moon and stars to rule the night, to serve as signs to mark seasons, days, and years. On the fifth day, he filled the waters with living creatures and the sky with birds. And on the sixth day, he created the animals of the earth, and finally the pinnacle of creation. He said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness." And he created man, male and female, and blessed them. Finally, on the seventh day, after completing his work, God rested, blessing the seventh day and making it holy. This is a powerful account of order and purpose. Every sentence emphasizes the absolute sovereignty of God. But have you noticed? This story, as majestic as it is, has significant silences. It says nothing about the world of angels. It says nothing about the origin of dark forces. It does not provide a specific timeline for the events in the Garden of Eden. This silence is not an omission. In the style of Genesis, it is a deliberate choice, focusing entirely on the physical world and the relationship between God and humanity. But it is in those very silences that the Book of Jubilees speaks up, and what it reveals will fill those gaps with astonishing truths. Now, let us, along with Moses, listen to the words of the angel of the presence as he begins to read from the heavenly tablets. The story begins like Genesis, but immediately, on the very first day of creation, a shocking detail is added, a detail that changes the entire context of the story. The book of Genesis says that on the first day, God created the heavens, the earth, and the light. But the book of Jubilees chapter 2 reveals that he did far more than that. The text says that on that first day, he created all the spirits of his hosts. This includes the angels of the presence, the angels of sanctification, the angels of the winds, of the clouds, of the darkness, of the snow, of the hail and the frost, and the spirits of all the creatures that would be brought forth upon the earth and in the heavens. Stop and ponder the implications of this. The Book of Jubilees declares definitively that the entire world of angels, the entire heavenly host, was created on the very first day, before there was a firmament, before there was dry land, and before there was a sun and a moon. Why is this detail so important? It has two immense consequences. First, it places the angels in the position of witnesses. They were not latecomers. They were the first audience for the entire drama of creation. They were there when God divided the waters. They were there when the continents rose from the sea. They were there when the first stars were lit. And most importantly, they were there when humanity was created. This gives them a special role in human history, not just as messengers, but as witnesses who were present from the beginning. Second, and this is the more terrifying part, if all spirits were created on the first day, that means the spirits who would rebel, the forces of darkness we would later know as Satan and the demons, were also created on that very day. The cosmic conflict between good and evil was not an event that arose later. It was seeded from the very dawn of time. Darkness existed alongside light from the very first moment. And this creates a completely new context, a latent tension for the perfect world God was about to create. Creation did not take place in a vacuum. It took place under the watchful eyes of both the faithful angels and the forces that were waiting for an opportunity to destroy. The Book of Jubilees does not stop at just revealing when the angels were created. It goes deeper, clearly distinguishing two types of angels with two completely different functions established right from the first day. This is a deliberate division, a division that would become the foundation for the later tragedy of the fall. You need to know this because it explains so much that the book of Genesis leaves open. The first type are the angels created to serve directly before the presence of God. The text calls them the angels of the presence and the angels of sanctification. Their role is to remain in the heavenly realms, unceasingly praising, worshipping, and carrying out the direct commands from the throne. They are the court, the inner circle, those who are sanctified to live in absolute proximity to the Creator. They are the ones who keep the Sabbath with God. Their function is holy and upward-facing. But there is a second type. The Book of Jubilees says that God also created another group of angels with a completely different purpose. These are the angels who were given authority to rule over the creatures of the earth. Each natural phenomenon, the wind, the clouds, the snow, the rain, has a ruling angel. And most importantly, humanity itself and the creatures on the earth were also placed under the supervision of these angels. Their function is downward-facing, interacting with the physical world and executing God's order on the earth. This group of angels would later be known in other texts, like the Book of Enoch, as the Watchers. Why is this distinction so important? Because it establishes a sacred boundary. One group was created to be in heaven, another group was created to rule on earth. One group lives in worship, another group lives in governance. To cross this boundary, to abandon one's assigned function, would be an act of rebellion. The Book of Jubilees is quietly laying the groundwork for one of the most tragic and controversial stories, the story of the Watchers who abandoned their posts, lusted after the daughters of men, and brought corruption to the world. The tragedy of the fallen angels was not a random event. It was the result of a group of angels violating their very own original creative purpose, a purpose that was established on the first day. When we come to the seventh day of the creation week, the Book of Jubilees once again takes the familiar story in Genesis and elevates it to an entirely new level. The book of Genesis chapter 2 says that after completing the work of creation, God rested on the seventh day, blessed the seventh day, and made it holy. This is a powerful statement. But the Book of Jubilees does not just stop there. It reveals that the sanctification of the Sabbath was not just a commemorative act after the work was done. It is an eternal statute, a cosmic principle that was established for both heaven and earth. Listen carefully to the words of the angel of the presence in Jubilees chapter 2. He says that God set the Sabbath as a great sign for all his creatures, and he declares that only two kinds of creatures are permitted to keep the Sabbath. The first kind, of course, is the people of Israel, who would receive this command later. But who is the second kind? It is he, God himself, and the angels of the first kind, that is, the angels of the presence and the angels of sanctification. Do you see the subtle but critically important difference here? The book of Genesis says that God blessed the seventh day. The book of Jubilees goes further, saying that God established and sanctified it as an eternal law for himself and for his heavenly court. This means that the Sabbath is not a law just for humanity. It is not a regulation that only began in the time of Moses. It is a divine reality, a rhythm of the universe, a part of the very operation of heaven itself. The highest angels, those who stand before the face of God, also rest and worship on the Sabbath. This revelation elevates the importance of the Sabbath to an unimaginable degree. It is no longer just a day of rest for humans. It is a participation, an immersion into the rhythm of heaven. When a person keeps the Sabbath, they are not just obeying a commandment. They are acting like the angels. They are bringing a piece of heaven down to earth. And this also creates a clear distinction. Only God, the highest angels, and the chosen people are given the privilege of keeping the Sabbath. The Gentile nations, the lower-ranking ruling angels, and the animals do not participate in this law. The Sabbath becomes a unique sign of the covenant, a sacred secret shared only between the Creator and those who belong to Him. This is a concept that will be repeated throughout the Book of Jubilees, and it explains why violating the Sabbath is considered such a serious sin. Because when you violate the Sabbath, you are not just breaking a rule, you are separating yourself from the order of heaven. After establishing the cosmic principles of the creation week, the angel of the presence now turns his attention to the first human couple. The book of Genesis tells the story seamlessly. Adam is created, placed in the garden, the animals are created, Eve is formed, and then the fall occurs. The timeline seems very short, perhaps only a few days or weeks. But once again, the Book of Jubilees intervenes, filling a gap we did not even know existed, and reveals an astonishing detail. According to the heavenly tablets, after Adam was created and placed in the Garden of Eden, he was not there alone for a short period. The text states very clearly, Adam was in the garden, cultivating and caring for it, keeping the commandments and living in perfect fellowship with the Creator for exactly 7 years. 7 years. Let that number sink in. Not 7 days, not 7 weeks, but 7 full years of peace, innocence, and perfection. For those 7 years, Adam walked with God in the garden. He learned about the world around him. He named all the animals. He lived in a state without sin, without shame, and without death. It was a forgotten golden age of humanity. The number 7, of course, is not random. Throughout the Bible, 7 is always the number of completeness, perfection, and divine finality. 7 days of creation, 7 days in a week, 7 lamps on the lampstand in the tabernacle. The fact that Adam had 7 perfect years in the Garden of Eden carries a deep symbolic meaning. It shows that a complete cycle of blessing had been given to him. He did not fail immediately. He was given a long and full period to live in a right relationship with the Creator. This detail completely changes how we view the tragedy of the fall. It is no longer a hasty mistake by a newly created naive human. It is a conscious choice made after a long period of living in truth and blessing. Those 7 perfect years make the subsequent fall even more tragic, and human responsibility even heavier. Adam was not an ignorant child. He was a man who had experienced the goodness of God for a long time, yet in the end still chose the path of disobedience. And when those 7 years ended, only then was Eve created, and the stage for the final test was set. Now that we have heard the core revelations from the heavenly tablets, it is time to take a step back and conduct a direct comparison. We have 2 texts before us. On one side is the Book of Genesis, the foundational, majestic, and inspired text. On the other side is the Book of Jubilees, the ancient, detailed, and also self-proclaimed revealed text. The difference between them lies not in direct contradictions, but in something much more subtle: silence. Let us systematize what we have seen. First, regarding the angels, Genesis is almost completely silent about their origin and time of creation. They simply appear in the story later when needed. In contrast, Jubilees is very definitive. They were created on the first day, with clearly defined roles. Second, regarding the Sabbath. Genesis says God blessed and sanctified it, a commemorative act. Jubilees turns it into a cosmic law, an eternal principle kept in heaven before humans existed. Third, regarding the time in the Garden of Eden. Genesis leaves this question open, creating a sense of a vague, undefined timeline. Jubilees closes that question with a specific and highly symbolic number: 7 years. Why is there this difference? This is not a random omission. The silence of the book of Genesis is a deliberate stylistic and theological choice. The author of Genesis, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, focused entirely on the story of the physical world and the relationship between God and humanity. The story is told concisely, focusing on the main points, omitting details that might distract from the core message. Conversely, the detail of the Book of Jubilees is also a deliberate theological choice. The author of Jubilees was writing with a different purpose. He did not just want to retell the story, he wanted to explain it. He wanted to fill in the gaps. He wanted to build a complete and coherent theological system, a system where everything is in order, every event is recorded, and every law has an indisputable divine origin. Genesis is an oil painting, focusing on large swaths of color and emotion. Jubilees is an architectural blueprint, focusing on every detail, every number, every line. Both describe the same structure, but from two different perspectives and with two completely different purposes. And to understand the purpose of Jubilees, we need to delve deeper into why the author felt it was necessary to add these details. To understand the true purpose of the Book of Jubilees, we cannot just read it in a vacuum. We must place it in the historical context in which it was written. The Judaism of the Second Temple period, a time of great turmoil, conflict, and identity crisis. This was the period after the Babylonian exile, when the Jewish people faced a new threat, not by the sword, but by culture: the rise of Hellenism. Greek culture, with its philosophy, art, sports, and its polytheistic religions, was spreading throughout the ancient world. It was attractive, it was modern, and it was a deadly threat to the uniqueness of the Jewish faith. Many Jews began to be assimilated. They neglected the ancient laws, they made light of the festivals, and they began to accept the practices of the Gentiles. In this context of crisis, the author of the Book of Jubilees employed an extremely powerful theological strategy, one we could call the ancientizing and celestializing of the law. He understood that in the ancient world, the more ancient something was, the more authority it held. By proving that the most important laws and festivals of Judaism did not just begin in the time of Moses, but had existed since the very dawn of time, he gave them a weight and an unchallengeable immutability. Consider again what we have seen. Why did he insist that the Sabbath dated from the seventh day of creation and was kept even by the angels? Because if that were true, then no Jew could justify neglecting it by saying it was just an old rule. It was not the law of man, it was the law of the universe. Why did he link the festivals to the events of Creation Week? To prove that they were not later human inventions to commemorate historical events. They were earthly reenactments of the eternal creative acts of God himself. This strategy was a drastic act of defending the faith. The author was telling his readers, These laws that you are taking lightly, these festivals that you are forgetting, are not mere traditions. They are the foundations of the universe. They are inscribed on the heavenly tablets. The angels keep them. The patriarchs lived by them long before there was a Torah. To abandon them is not just cultural assimilation. It is an act of rebellion against the very order of creation. In this way, the Book of Jubilees transformed the keeping of the law from a national duty into a cosmic responsibility. One of the most profound refinements that the Book of Jubilees brings lies not just in what happened, but in the purpose behind them. Consider the Garden of Eden again. In the book of Genesis, Adam was placed in the garden to work it and take care of it. The purpose seems practical, like that of a gardener. But the Book of Jubilees adds a layer of theological meaning that is critically important. It asserts that Adam was placed in the garden not just to work, but to keep the commandments of the Lord. This is a subtle change, but one with enormous consequences. It transforms the Garden of Eden from a mere dwelling place into a space for covenantal testing. It implies that from the very beginning, the relationship between God and man was built on a foundation of law and obedience. Adam was not just a creature, he was a partner in a covenant. He had responsibilities, obligations, and clear boundaries. The only commandment explicitly stated in Genesis is the prohibition against eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But Jubilees implies that there may have been more. By saying, "keep the commandments" in the plural, the author suggests that Adam was given an understanding of God's will, a rudimentary version of the Torah. The Garden of Eden becomes a primordial tabernacle, a holy place where man lived in the direct presence of God and served him through obedience. This emphasis on covenant makes Adam's failure much more severe. He did not simply disobey in a single act, he broke the first covenant. He failed in his role as the representative of humanity, the one entrusted with the responsibility of maintaining a right relationship with the Creator. His failure was not just a personal mistake, it was a violation of a sacred contract, a violation that brought legal consequences for all of his descendants. When we look at the Garden of Eden through the lens of Jubilees, it is no longer a fairy tale about a magical garden. It becomes a courtroom, a stage where the terms of the relationship between heaven and earth were established and broken. And the fact that Adam had 7 full years to live by the terms of this covenant before he failed further emphasizes the tragedy of his choice. He knew the rules, he had lived in the blessing of the covenant, but in the end, he still chose the path of violation. Why is the Book of Jubilees obsessed with order? Why does it emphasize precise numbers, strict timelines, and cosmic laws? To understand this, we must understand the chaos it is reacting against. The author of Jubilees did not write in a peaceful and stable environment. He was writing in the middle of a cultural and religious storm, the Hellenistic period. After the conquests of Alexander the Great, Greek culture, with its language, philosophy, art, and polytheistic religion, spread throughout the Near East. For many, it brought enlightenment and opportunity. But for devout Jews, it was a deadly threat. Greek philosophy elevated human reason and often led to skepticism and relativism, challenging the concept of an absolute, revealed truth. The Greek religions, with their countless flawed gods and chaotic myths, were a direct insult to the belief in a single, holy, and orderly God. Worse yet, some Greek leaders, like Antiochus Epiphanes, actively sought to eradicate Judaism forbidding circumcision, forbidding the observance of the Sabbath, and desecrating the temple by erecting an altar to Zeus. In this context of chaos and persecution, the Book of Jubilees emerges as a powerful manifesto of order. It is a theological resistance. Every detail emphasizing order is a direct strike against the chaos of the Hellenistic world. Does the world seem chaotic? No, the Book of Jubilees says, the universe operates according to a perfect 364-day solar calendar. Do philosophers say that truth is relative? No, the Book of Jubilees says truth is absolute and has been eternally inscribed on the heavenly tablets. Do other nations have chaotic creation stories with warring and incestuous gods? No, the Book of Jubilees says our creation was an orderly process, accomplished in 7 days by a single God. The emphasis on order, calendrics, and precise numbers is not just an authorial preference, it is a weapon. It is a way to build a theological fortress wall around the Jewish community, to remind them that their faith is not one of many options, but the reflection of a sacred and immutable cosmic order. In a world sinking into the darkness of cultural syncretism and moral relativism, the Book of Jubilees is a beacon of absolutism, an affirmation that no matter how chaotic the world of men becomes, the universe of God always has and always will operate in perfect order. Now, let us return to the first and perhaps most important revelation we have discovered, the creation of the entire heavenly host on the first day. We have discussed how this sets the stage for the cosmic conflict, but there is another deeply profound consequence that we must analyze. By placing the creation of the angels before everything else, the Book of Jubilees has made them the witnesses of all of human history. Think about this. When Adam and Eve walked in the garden, the angels were there observing. When Cain killed Abel in the field, the angels witnessed it. When the corruption of man reached its peak before the great flood, the angels recorded it. When humanity built the Tower of Babel in their pride, the angels heard their defiant words. They are not outsiders who were informed after the fact. They are direct witnesses, present at the scene of every crime and every righteous act throughout history. This brings a completely new perspective to their intervention in human affairs later on. When the angels came to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, they were not just carrying out a command, they were executing a sentence based on the evidence they themselves have collected over centuries. When an angel of the presence recites history to Moses, he is not just telling a story, he is giving the testimony of a witness. More importantly, this concept makes the judgment of God more tangible and continuous. In the worldview of Jubilees, heaven is not a distant place, unconcerned with what happens on earth. It is a constantly active courtroom, with countless witnesses watching and recording every action. This creates a sense of urgency and responsibility for humanity. You are never truly alone. Every choice, every word, every most secret action is observed and recorded by eternal entities. This also explains why the Book of Jubilees and related texts like the Book of Enoch have such a great focus on the role of angels, both good and bad. They are not supporting characters in the story of humanity. They are main characters in a larger cosmic play, where the history of Earth is just one stage. By understanding their role as historical witnesses, we begin to see that the biblical story is not just about God and humanity. It is a three-party story: God, humanity, and the heavenly host, who are observing, intervening, and awaiting the day when all the books will be opened. After delving deep into ancient details and theological conflicts, it is time for us to bring these truths back to our world. What is the meaning of a cosmic Sabbath or a sacred calendar for a person living in the midst of the hustle and chaos of the 21st century? The lesson from the Book of Jubilees is not merely about mechanically observing rules. It is deeper than that. It is an invitation, a call for us to recognize that the universe was created with a rhythm, a sacred order. The modern world, with its demand to work 24/7, with its temptation of ceaseless entertainment, and with the anxiety of always being connected, is actively fighting against that rhythm. It wants us to believe that our value lies in our productivity, that rest is laziness, and that nothing is sacred. The revelation from Jubilees about a Sabbath kept by both heaven and earth is a powerful resistance against that worldview. It reminds us that rest is not a luxury, but an act of worship. It is not a sign of weakness, but an expression of trust in the provider, the one who completed his work and rested. When we choose to stop, to turn off the noise of the world, and to focus on the Creator, we are not just recharging ourselves. We are participating in a cosmic chorus of worship, a chorus that has echoed since before humanity existed. We are declaring that our lives are not defined by the chaos of the world, but by the sacred order of God. The story of creation in Jubilees challenges us to seek the order and the will of God behind every commandment, every principle. It invites us to live in a holy rhythm, a structuring of time that prioritizes worship, rest, and fellowship with God, instead of being swept away by the endless stream of busyness and anxiety. That is a lesson not just for the ancient Jews. It is an urgent lesson for all of us today. One of the most astonishing revelations we have discovered today is the detail of Adam's 7 perfect years in the Garden of Eden. That is not just a historical number, it is a prototype, a model for the faith journey of each one of us. Ponder this personally. In your own life, have there been periods where you felt you were living in your own Garden of Eden? It could be the period right after you first came to faith, when everything was new, your love for Him was fervent, and His presence seemed so close. It could be a period when your family was at peace, your work was stable, and your prayers seemed to be answered quickly. These are the spiritual summers, the seasons of blessing and peace, the 7 perfect years that God gives to us. But the story of Adam, illuminated by the Book of Jubilees, brings a warning. Those 7 years were not just a time for enjoyment, they were also a time of preparation. Adam was given a long and full period to learn about God, to build his relationship with Him, and to strengthen his understanding of His will. But when the final test came, he failed. This raises an urgent question for each of us. What are we doing in our seasons of blessing? Are we using the periods of peace to dig deep into God's Word, to strengthen our faith, to build a firm foundation that cannot be shaken? Or are we becoming complacent, taking those graces for granted and assuming the summer will last forever? The truth is, after every garden, there is a serpent waiting. After every period of peace, a trial will come, and how we use our time of grace will determine how we face our time of testing. The story of Adam's 7 perfect years is not just a tragedy of the past, it is a warning for the present. Do not waste the years in your garden. Use them wisely, because sooner or later, a cunning voice will sound and your faith will be tested to its limits. So, what are we to do with these truths? Does knowing that the angels were created on the first day, or that the Sabbath is a cosmic law, change how we live tomorrow? The answer must be yes. Otherwise, all of this is just interesting but useless knowledge. The revelations in the Book of Jubilees are not just for the intellect, they are for life. They are a call for us to raise our standards. We are living in a world that encourages spiritual mediocrity, a world that says it is enough to believe vaguely and live a relatively good life. But the Book of Jubilees shows us a different standard, a standard not of this world, but of heaven. It shows us that even the highest angels keep God's law. It shows us that the universe is built on a foundation of order and holiness. The call for us is clear. Stop living by the standards of the world and start living by the standard of heaven. Do not just keep the commandments as a dry list of rules to avoid punishment. Instead, seek the order, the wisdom, and the will of God behind them. See them not as burdens, but as a privilege, an opportunity for us, creatures of dust, to participate in the rhythm and holiness of the heavenly court itself. Challenge yourself. Look at your life and ask, does my schedule reflect God's order or the world's chaos? Are my decisions based on the eternal principles of heaven or the temporary values of society? The spiritual war we are facing is not just a fight against personal sin. It is a greater war, a war to bring the order of heaven into the chaos of our lives on earth. It is time to stop being a lukewarm believer. It is time to hunger for a righteousness that reflects the perfection of the very one who created us, the one who established his laws not just for Israel, but for the entire universe. Today, the angel of the presence has begun to read to us the first chapter of cosmic history from the heavenly tablets. We have traveled from the dawn of time to the threshold of the first tragedy. Before we conclude, let us review the 4 key revelations, the 4 pieces of forgotten truth that the Book of Jubilees has brought us. 1. The entire heavenly host, both good and evil, was created on the very first day of creation, making them witnesses to all of human history. 2. The law of the Sabbath was not a later invention for humans, but a cosmic principle, a sacred rhythm kept by God himself and the highest angels. 3. Adam was given a perfect cycle of 7 full years in the Garden of Eden, a golden age of innocence and fellowship, making his later fall all the more tragic. And 4. The Garden of Eden was not just a garden, but a covenantal space where the commandments were established and humanity was created not just to exist, but to live in obedience. The final question for you this week: why do you think knowing precisely when the angels were created and that the Sabbath has a cosmic origin was so important for ancient readers facing the temptations of foreign culture? How did that strengthen their faith? Share your thoughts in the comments. The 7 years of peace have ended. The stage is set. The characters are in position. And now the tragedy is about to strike. In the next episode of our Jubilees series, we will witness the event that changed the world forever. We will explore the details of the fall through the lens of Jubilees, reveal the names of the first daughters of Adam and Eve, and delve into the mystery behind humanity's first shocking crime, Cain and Abel, with details you will not find in the Book of Genesis. Prepare yourselves, because the darkness is about to fall.